So, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Entrepreneurial Lunch and Learn offered by the Lawrence Enfield Center for Entrepreneurship at Baruch College. I am Gary Smalls, the program coordinator here at the Field Center. The Field Center for Entrepreneurship is a multifaceted division at Baruch College, offering free services and programs for the entrepreneurial community. Today's Lunch and Learn webinar is presented today by Chirag Nijjer, founder of EntreKey. EntreKey is designed to help business owners navigate the chaos of owning a business by making business knowledge more accessible. In college, Chirag realized that most business struggles stem from a lack of access to business education and knowledge. So he began to learn as much as he could, and he fell in love with the process and teaching and sharing others. So thank you so much for being with us today. Please feel free to tell our audience a little bit more about yourself before you start your presentation.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Actually, it's part of the presentation itself. So mind if I just jump right into it?
Absolutely.
Set up from there. Awesome. Okay. Hey, everyone. Give me 1 second to figure out how to share my screen. A little mad we're not using Google Meet, but it's okay.
Yeah.
All right. For those of you, it's going to make sense why I'm saying that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let me know if we're able to see the screen right now. How are we feeling?
You're doing good.
Awesome. Okay. All right. So, hey, everyone. Welcome to the talk Beyond Logos and Colors, How to Become a Confident Strategic Brand Marketer. My name is Chirag, and we're going to go a little bit into who I am and why I'm speaking to you today as soon as my clicker starts working. Awesome. Perfect. So, like I said, my name is Chirag, and one of the most important things about me is that I grew up in a small business family. Literally, one of my first toys was actually the credit card machine, and we used to have a crib at the store where I grew up. But you can see on the bottom photo there, you see 5-year-old me getting my first sales quota of 5 dresses. Your boy sold 7 that day, right? But growing up in this small business family was an amazing experience because I got to learn a lot of things like public speaking and this ability to be able to connect with people. A big problem, though, was growing up with some of the struggles that come with owning a small business, right? You don't have the resources or the access to knowledge to be able to combat a lot of the problems you're facing. If things were tough, we didn't reach out to a consultant or an advisor. You kind of just kept doing what was happening and just marched forward. And then I ended up growing up a little bit and realizing that that's not necessarily the case, right? Oftentimes, it's not that people don't know what to do or how or why they're trying to do what they're doing. It's usually that they don't have the how, the access to knowledge. And so when I went over to college, I decided, you know what, let me start exploring some of this space. And I ended up going to our library. I went out to Lafayette College, graduated class of 2020. There, they had this entire section of the library of all these business books that I never thought I was going to be able to afford. And I was like, oh, great, this is amazing. I get yelled at by the librarian all the time. But I got to study a bunch of stuff, ended up learning it and started teaching it to local businesses and entrepreneurs. And then one day I ended up calling my dad and explaining a simple concept some of you may know called the 4 Ps of marketing. I thought he didn't think much of it, Indian immigrant, entrepreneur his entire life, but suddenly he calls me back a week later and goes, hey, I used what you taught me and things kind of make sense. And that's when I realized, wait, we can actually do this on a much broader scale. Moving forward, that's turned into EntreKey. So biggest platform that we're on right now is TikTok. So if any of you have TikTok right now and you want to show some support, please go over and shoot us a follow and check out a couple videos. But the main thing I do is that I collect stories. So at EntreKey, the goal is to be able to help business owners navigate the chaos of owning a business through storytelling. I find interesting businesses and larger than life people, learn about as much as I can about them, and then try to distill those lessons to share them with business owners. The goal is if we can increase your access to information and knowledge, we can make it easier for you to actually succeed and excel in the space you want to excel in. This looks like free content on platforms like social media, one-on-one sessions that I do a lot with brands and different companies and all, and workshops or talks like these where I come in and speak. That's what I call my 5 to 9. As far as my 9 to 5 go, I work over at Google as a Platinum Customer Success Lead, which means I work with some of our biggest advertisers like Louis Vuitton and Wayfair on sort of helping them through common issues. And it's kind of a combination of crisis management and proactive problem solving. I do have to make one thing very, very clear. Google is in no way associated with EntreKey whatsoever and is not sponsoring or as like supporting this talk at all. But just wanted to share that as part of my identity. I'm happy to answer some questions, but if I push back, just know it's because of that. So that's my 9 to 5, and this is my 5 to 9. So we're going to go ahead and jump into the call, but Gary, I'm going to pause there. How's my pacing going? How's everything sounding? Can you hear everything all good?
All good.
Okay, so in this talk, actually, I'm going to go back for a second. The goal is about understanding one of the things I found. Okay, let me break it down this way. in all the one-on-ones that I tend to have, I found that it's often that there's a lot of options out there. It's not a lack of options, but rather an overabundance of them. So the goal of this talk is to be able to provide you with some key strategies on how to get started. They're not going to be basic things like, oh, here's how your logo should look, or here's how your colors should look, but rather, okay, now that you have a brand and you want to get out there and start marketing, how do you actually start doing that? How do you build a strategy that makes sense to you and you can like sufficiently use to be able to build something? And that's what we're going to go over in this talk. The first part we're going to start off is by understanding what it means to market a brand. So the first distinction often comes is what's the difference between a business and a brand? For that, it's that your businesses are usually single faceted. They're focused on a product or the service that you're offering. So all your messaging is usually around the idea of like, hey, buy this product, buy this service, pay this much. But a brand is multifaceted. It's not just saying, hey, this is what I sell and why you should buy it, but here's what I sell, here's why you should buy it, here's who I am, here's what we believe in, here's how you can connect with us. So what usually tends to happen is that it's not business versus brand, but rather that your businesses eventually elevate into becoming brands. Brands tend to last much longer than businesses. I mean, let's take a look at even, I don't know how people feel about Meta, but regardless of how you feel, Meta is a brand, right? And regardless of their core product, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or WhatsApp or anything else that they're doing, that business can always change over time, but that brand lasts over a long period of time. Because your business is what you sell and your brand is who you are. But now, the reason why we want this distinction and why it's so important for us is because when we talk about marketing a brand, it's very different than how you market a business. In your business, you're very transaction focused. You're saying, okay, I'm going to market, I'm going to put out an ad there. I want people to come to my website and I want them to buy one thing and move. Or I'm opening up my storefront. I'm going to have really flashy lights. I'm going to get people as they're walking across the boulevard to come in and buy something. However, when you're marketing a brand, it's about building a relationship. I'm not as worried about that immediate sale or that one-time sale. I'm worried about how are they perceiving me and are they connecting with me? Are they going to stay in for the long term? So I may not sell to you for the first 7 times you walk into my store, but by that 8th time, you are such a hardcore fan of mine that you're going to support me in everything that I'm doing. Starbucks is a very famous example of this. In Starbucks, there was a policy for a very long time that regardless of what you were doing, as long as you weren't disruptive, the staff was instructed not to kick you out, even if you weren't buying coffee from them. Because the idea was that people will come to these spaces, spend time here, use our chargers, use our Wi-Fi, and they'll start falling in love with the space and the way it makes them feel. And over time, they'll continue to bring their friends here and eventually, in the long term, become Starbucks fans, not coffee fans. So we know that this idea of moving from a business to a brand is important, but how do you actually do that? Like, Chirag, what does that look like in practice instead of just random abstract concepts of some guy who's just throwing a talk at you? Well, an easy way to do that is by creating brand stories. In our society, stories are often the most powerful way for us to amplify what we're doing. So the moment you're able to stop discussing your venture or your startup or your idea as just a business, yeah, like I sell this, right? And the moment you start saying, hey, we're a XYZ company that does XYZ stuff, and some of our products are XYZ, that's a big change in the story that you're telling. And even that small change is big enough to move you from a business to a brand. More specifically, there are 6 different types of brand stories that you need to learn how to tell. In a much longer version of this, and usually when I'm doing corporate workshops, we tend to go into this. For the sake of time, I'm going to sort of whiz through this. But there is going to be this QR code popping up throughout the presentation. It's my feedback form. If you get a second to fill out the feedback form there, you'll be added to the email list. And there'll be a bunch of content like free videos and workshops coming out over the next couple of weeks. So you'll get early access to some of that stuff and hopefully get to learn some of these. But these are 6 types of stories that you're going to learn how to tell. And in those workshops, I tend to go over real life examples and break them down into how you can adapt them for your specific project. But moving from there, right? So we've identified that the difference between a business and a brand is that these brands are much more holistic. But now understanding the difference between branding and marketing itself, so taking it to that next level. Well, the thing is, there isn't this sort of competitive nature to them, because your branding tells me who you are, and your marketing is how you're going to actually tell me that. What we mean by that, here's an example. One of the big tips that I'll tend to give, especially beginning or student entrepreneurs, is don't overcomplicate your life. If huge, massive brands all around the world aren't, why are you? And we'll show some examples about that in a second. So for branding, a strategy that I want you to adopt is that I want you to pick a few words, feelings, or terms that you want your company, your brand to be associated with. And then all you're doing for your marketing is just finding unique ways to remind your audience that those are the words you want them to use. Because at the end of the day, that's all it is. Jeff Bezos once said that your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. When you leave this talk, there's 80% chance you're going to forget most of what I've said. But my hope is that there'll be certain words that I will continuously repeat throughout this presentation. I make marketing simple. I break down abstract concepts into these formulas and frameworks. We make things easy to understand. These words are the words that I want you to remember so that when someone asks, hey, what was that talk about? You'd be like, oh, it was about branding and marketing. Yeah, the guy broke down abstract concepts into frameworks, or he made things really easy to understand. That's the essence of marketing your brand, is telling people what words you want them to use and making it easy for them to remember those words over the long period. Now let's take a look at actual examples of brands that do this. For those of you, if any of you follow some of my content, you'll see this example a ton. I love giving it. Heinz tomato ketchup. Okay, the Heinz marketing team is like you got a bunch of people, put them on like drugs and just put them in the same room and just went go wild, right? So Heinz has two major words that they really want associated with their product. One is slow and the other is red. The deeper red that your ketchup is, the more sort of pure or more high quality it is. And the slower that it comes out of the bottle means that it's not watered down and it's high quality. And so they end up doing a bunch of unique things to remind their consumers about that. They picked their words, which were slow and red, and their marketing is unique things. So for example, they once had their website take 57 minutes to load, and all it loaded was a big red screen. So red and slow. There was a time when they released an exclusive puzzle that was just one big red puzzle, 570 pieces. It was supposed to take you time, so slow, and it was red. And there was one time where they partnered up with Waze in Canada. Waze is that navigation app, for those of you who don't know. There's a certain speed at which that ketchup is supposed to come out of their bottle. Yeah, they have it down to a science. But what they've done is for anyone that was traveling in traffic at that speed, they offer them a coupon for either Burger King or free ketchup or something. Again, just further reminding people in unique, fun ways, red, slow. Seems pretty easy. Well, there's another example too, Taco Bell. So Taco Bell sells suitcases. Like what? But the reason they do this is because Taco Bell has this brand, or those words that they want you to associate them with are summer, travel, food, live más, right? This idea of going out, partying, having fun. And at the end of the night, when you're all wasted, going over to Taco Bell and grabbing Taco Bell. And so in order to remind their consumers and their customers about this, they do fun and unique things like partner up with Cowpack in order to release suitcases, or they sell things like these beach towels. They even have a resort in the US specifically for partying that has all Taco Bell themed stuff. My little sister's on this call and I already know she's already salivating off this, right? But again, these examples are just more examples of brands going, here's the words I want you to use. And now I'm just going to find unique ways to tell you about them. Gary, I'm going to pause here for a moment. How's the pacing going?
So far, so good.
Awesome. Okay. Everyone really impressed by how smart I sound, right? I hate that I can't hear everyone right now. Okay.
It's all good.
Appreciate it. Okay. So to recap this real quick, before we start jumping into some of the more strategic stuff, this high level stuff, in order to elevate your business into a brand, you have to learn how to be able to tell stories about them. But then the more important thing from there is using marketing in order to get those stories out to your audience. And as we move forward, we're going to start talking into, well, how do you actually do that? We're going to start off by something that I call the brand curiosity theory. See, in the 1900s, we had this huge boom, especially in the US, that came to advertising and marketing. The only big sort of issue that we see, or not the only, the big issue that we saw in that period was this heavy reliance on fear tactics or emotion-based marketing. Unfortunately, often especially appealing towards women. So for example, Listerine, before this advertising, Listerine wasn't really famous, right? No one really used mouthwash for the whole part. But they took out an entire page ad saying, often a bridesmaid, never a bride, hinting towards that idea that if you had bad breath, you weren't going to get married. That led to a huge boom, and now we know that the entire oral hygiene industry is such a huge, massive industry. Same thing happened with deodorant. Deodorant, it was this idea that, hey, you do smell, and that's bad. Again, leading to another boom. And you could see some of these other ones, you even see some hand soap stuff. This idea that if you use this, our competitors' dish soap, it's going to make your hands wrinkly, but ours won't. Thankfully, society's changed, right? And there's this massive shift, especially over the last 5 years with apps like TikTok and Instagram growing in popularity. The problem is a lot of brands haven't adapted, right? And so they still use this emotion-based marketing, sometimes relying solely on fear, or sometimes trying to rely solely on being funny. We see this all the time. There are a lot of brands on TikTok that go viral because they make all these fun and funny videos, but they don't convert. They don't get customers. They get a ton of followers, not customers. It's because they're still relying on emotion-based marketing. It works in getting people's attention, but not alone, because consumers have increased their ability, or consumers have an increased access to information. Which brings us to the brand curiosity theory, that the essence of effective marketing is answering your audience's questions. And what do I mean by this? Marketing academia has shown us that there's many stages that people go through whenever they're interacting with you, your product, or anything they're doing. One of those models, and there's many of them, and we'll talk about some of them later on, is the customer loyalty ladder. And we'll talk through this later on as far as like what those middle levels mean that are blank right now. But for now, just understand this concept that there's these certain stages that people go through from when they first start off as a prospective, which is a complete stranger to you, to eventually becoming advocates, people who go out of their way to support you. Well, how do you get them to go up these stages? See, when people first meet you, their questions tend to be relatively simple, whether they meet you for the first time as a person or if they meet your business. Who are you? What's your name? What do you do? What do you sell? What are your hobbies, right? These simple, easy, simple sentences. But the more and more that they get to learn about you, the complexity of their questions increase. Hey, what do you do? Okay, cool. That product. Can your product do XYZ thing? Can it integrate into this? Can we do that, right? How do I get involved? But the question becomes, why do we want this? Well, because over time, the more and more questions that they're able to answer, their intellectual capital, what they know about you to be true, increases over time. As that does, so does the complexity of the questions they ask you. The more I know about your life, the more complex questions I can ask you. But in that same practice, so does my brand loyalty. The more I know about you and the more I understand who you are and what you do, the more interested and invested I become into what you're doing. So moving people up the stages is all about answering their questions and getting them to move to those next stages of more complex questions. Your job as a marketer is to balance your audience's curiosity. But let's pause out for a second here. I'm not saying just answer their questions, right? If I ask you who you are, and well, let's talk about it. If you come up to me and you said, hey, what's your name? And I just said, I have one. That's not enough. That's weird. You're gonna be like, what the hell's wrong with you? Not like, what? Right? But what if you came up to me and said, hey, who are you? And I said, oh, I'm Chirag. I do this, blah, 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 blah. Oh, by the way, my social security number, blah, blah. Like, that's too much information. And you're going to become apprehensive. And you're like, whoa, what's going on? But what if you ask me, hey, who are you? And I just answer your question. I say, I'm Chirag. That's technically answering your question. But what I've done is made it a bit awkward. What are you going to ask next? I've put the onus back on you. But what if you were to ask me, hey, who are you? And I said, hey, I'm Chirag. I went to Lafayette College for economics. Hey, I'm Chirag. I work at Google. Hey, I'm Chirag. I create content on TikTok. Each one of these sentences not only answers the question you've asked of me, but also sets the stage for you to ask a more complex question later on. Oh, you work at Google. What's that like? Oh, you create content. Where do you create content? Oh, you live in New York City. Okay, cool. Where's that? I'm like for blanking on one of the questions I asked. But the concept becomes answer what they've asked of you, but also give them something so that they can now start going into these more complex questions. So I'm going to pause there. See, Gary and Gabe, since you're my only two audience members that can talk to me, how are we feeling so far?
Feeling good. You are tracking well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
How are we doing on time? So got
on time. And if anything, I'll send you a direct message as well.
Solid. Perfect. Okay. So now that we've gone over this concept, right? One is what the point of marketing a brand look like? What does marketing a brand look like? And then we've talked about this idea of like what marketing in essence actually is. Now let's talk about, well, how do you actually put it into practice? So if I've told you that the goal of marketing or the essence of effective marketing is answering people's questions, well, let's take a look at some models that are going to help us identify those questions, the answers that we want to give to them, when we should be giving them, and in what style. And to do that, we're going to use three very well-known old models in sort of entrepreneurship, academia, and research. You'll notice that a lot of my talks center around trying to pull in things from actual academia and research, because the goal is, look, there's so much research out there. This has been studied for the last 200 years, and all that information, especially as a college student who has access to like databases like JSTOR, you have access to them all the time, and you should be taking advantage of that. But to get started, we're going to go through each one of these models and how to use them to start making a realistic plan that you can move forward with. We're going to start with the 4 P's of marketing, which is going to help us understand what are the types of questions that people will usually ask of you. And you should have these answers prepared. So you should sit down with your team or just by yourself if you're a solopreneur and answer these questions and make sure your answers are those compound answers, ones that answer the question, but also set the stage for a more complex question. We're going over the ADA marketing funnel, which is going to let us know, okay, well, when should you give what answer? Right? Because if you start off the bat giving me a really, really long, complex answer, and I just met you a minute ago, you're going to scare me, right? So when do you choose what information to give? And lastly, we're going to figure out how to combine those questions and answers and the timing to figure out like, okay, well, now how do I move you up and up into becoming an advocate for me? So starting off with the 4 P's of marketing, because of the sake of time, I'm not going to go into detail, but lucky for you at the end of this, there are a bunch of videos that I've done where you can actually sit and then the video takes you question by question and you'll have time to pause the video, write down your answer and all that kind of stuff. So for each one, I'm just going to give you a high level overview and then give you an example and then move to the next one. Okay. So the first P is product, right? And some of the questions that fall into this are, the general gist is, what is it that you're selling? What does it do? How does it feel? And how does that compare to your to your competitors? An example that I usually use for this is Play-Doh. Now, when Play-Doh first launched, it was actually created to clean walls. This was back when we used to have coal heating in the United States. We often saw that there was a lot of dirt and soot that would get onto the walls of your houses. So Play-Doh was originally called something, I think, called Kutal or something. And instead of focusing on what it was made of and all of its ingredients, they focused on telling their customers what it did. Here's how it is going to solve your problem. Use this to wipe off the soot that's on your walls. But then what happened after we shifted over to gas heating instead? Well, Kutal at that point had to figure out, do we just scrap our business? No, because at the end of the day, they were able to find that the sister-in-law of the creator said, well, I've kind of been using Play-Doh in some of my classrooms. And by the way, you should call it Play-Doh. And so they were able to shift their product. The product stayed the same, but because they took the time to understand what's the problem that our product can solve, they didn't fixate on the product, but rather the problem that the product can solve. They were able to identify different avenues to grow. And obviously Play-Doh now has become this massive brand. The second P is promotion, which centers around, well, how are you going to actually advertise and showcase your product to people? For this, one of the great examples I tend to give is M&Ms. When M&Ms launched, it kind of struggled at first a bit in order to get market share because kids loved M&Ms, but parents at the time didn't know about M&Ms and they grew up with a different set of candy. And so what they would do is when they would go out and buy this candy for their kids, they would end up buying chocolates that they were familiar with from their childhood. So instead, in order to sort of tackle that, M&Ms ended up coming out with a campaign targeting the parents, not the children. So instead of telling the children how great the candy tastes, they put out an ad saying, the milk chocolate melts in your mouth, not in your hands. The idea was that a lot of parents were complaining that my kids eat M&Ms, it gets all over their hands and they go and touch all the furniture. This is a campaign that was specifically centered towards the parents, and it did phenomenally. After this, M&Ms was finally able to establish itself as a legitimate brand, and we know it to be a massive brand now. The third one is placement. Well, where's your product actually going to be? And now, one of my favorite examples of this is IKEA. So IKEA has perfected the model of being able to take all of its products, put them in warehouses and create these elaborate displays. So you actually get a chance to be able to see what that product will look like, say, in an actual setup like a living room. The only problem with IKEA, though, is that they need these massive warehouses in order to do this stuff. Most of the time, cities don't have these warehouses inside the cities, but rather on the outskirts. So in order to travel to an IKEA, it usually takes a long amount of time, especially in a country like Saudi Arabia, or an area like Saudi Arabia, sorry. In Saudi Arabia, one of the IKEA ideas that they ended up doing was they partnered up with navigation apps, and they told consumers that if you travel to get to one of our IKEAs, based on the miles, or I guess in their case, kilometers that you've traveled, will give you a certain discount, right? So this idea of rewarding people for the travel because they know that their product is going to be located somewhere far. A lot of people took advantage of this saying, oh my God, I'm going to rack up so many kilometers. I'm going to get a free drawer case or something, a bookcase. But in the process of giving away a free bookcase, they're able to bring these people into these elaborate setups and upsell them on a bunch of other products instead. Lastly is price, right? But I don't want you to think of price as just that dollar amount that comes up at the end of your product. I want you to think about the value, right? Your currency is just a symbol of the amount of value you're providing. So a good example for this, right, is Kirkland Signature. Now, Kirkland, the brand, I'm forgetting Costco, right? I think owns it. But the Costco brand put out a Kirkland Signature, which is their in-house brand. They sell a coffee blend. Turns out that coffee blend is made by Starbucks, but it's packaged under Kirkland. See, Starbucks knows that there are people who want to be able to buy some of their cheaper coffee, but instead of putting their existing coffee on discount and alienating some of those more affluent consumers, they package up that stuff and put it under Kirkland's label. This way, they're able to tackle both markets, those that just want a cheap coffee that they can keep moving, as well as those that want this premium experience. So they're able to tackle the value at two different levels. Another company that does this really well is Gillette. Years ago, before Gillette and P&G merged, Gillette used to have a strategy that every brand all across the globe was the same messaging. But then they went into Japan, merged with P&G, and P&G said, wait a second, Japanese consumers are not like your average American's consumer. There's a reason Gillette's not working that well. And they're like, what is it? Well, it's because one of the things we found is that Japanese consumers like the idea of extra value. And so a simple fix was, in America, you saw Gillette Fusion 5. In Japan, you saw Gillette Fusion 5 plus 1. The mere change of this small value add was enough to get Japanese consumers to say, oh, I'm getting something more. And it allowed Gillette to put a foothold into Japan. So it's not just about the price, but what value are you providing? And again, like I said, there's an in-depth video about this if you're interested on the YouTube page. YouTube channel is a little old, right? So please don't make fun of me on that, right? But it goes in depth in each one of these since we can't do that in the time that we have right now. But the whole goal is for each of these questions you see here, actually sitting down and coming up with your answers and practicing those answers. So when people ask you about them, when your marketing team asks you about them, when your investors ask you about them, you have those clear, solid answers. And this is just a base of 20 questions that you need to get started with. Now that we know our questions and we know the answers that we want to tell for them, let's talk a little bit about like, when do you actually share those answers? So the 8-up marketing funnel is one of the oldest marketing concepts out there, right? And it argues that your audience, when someone interacts with you for the first time, goes through these 4 stages. The reason I love this model is that it's applicable to everything in life. When you meet someone brand new, when you buy something, when you sign up for an email, when you came to this event, we all went through these 4 stages. The first one being awareness. You first become aware of the fact that this thing exists. And alternatively, the brand, or in your case, what you're going to do with your marketing, people who are in awareness, you're just going to tell them that you exist, right? These are doing social media trends. These are making funny videos. All you're doing is saying, hey, we're out here, right? And then moving them to the next level, which is interest. They become interested in learning more about you, right? At this point, what you're doing is giving them details. You're saying, hey, we do XYZ thing, right? We sell XYZ thing, and here's what our product kind of does. Then one of the, every time I do this, I always forget that I've got this slide here at the Kardashians, and it always throws me off every time it comes up on the screen. So the Kardashians are very, very good at this model, right? The Kardashians, I have never watched a single episode of Keeping Up with the Kardashians, but at any given moment, I can tell you who's pregnant with whose child, I can tell you who's cheating on who, and who's about to open a brand new business, because this family is phenomenal at awareness content. Right? This family is great at getting into the headlines. And there's a famous quote by the mothers at one point saying, when they first started getting some fame, was, how can I turn these 15 minutes of fame and turn them into 30? Because they're really good at getting in your face. The problem is, because I'm not their target demographic, what they keep doing is getting in my face. They keep making me aware of the fact that they exist, but I'm not moving into interest. And that's the thing to be sort of careful about when you do this. A lot of brands, especially these days on social media, will try to copy something like Scrub Daddy or Duolingo, right? Which is, let's just make a bunch of funny videos and get really risky and see if that works. it doesn't always work, because it's not just about letting people know that you exist, but it's about actually getting them to become interested. And if you bother them too many times of letting them know, hey, I exist, hey, I exist, hey, I exist, without actually going into the interest phase, you end up annoying them to the point where they don't want to interact with you anymore. But anyways, moving into that third phase. So after they become interested and you've shared information about what you do in details, you want them to start desiring to move forward. And the best way to do this is to start focusing on them at that point. Say, hey, I told you we exist. I told you what we sell and what it does. It's amazing for your specific case, right? This will really help you do XYZ thing. And lastly, moving them into action, your goal is to say, well, here's the next step that I need you to take, right? Giving them some sort of incentive to move on. One of the best examples to follow for this is Scrub Daddy. Scrub Daddy is really good on TikTok for this, in that they have a ton of awareness content, which is, oh, sec, y'all. Sorry, y'all, give me just 1 second. I think we're having technical difficulties here.
It's all good. We are here. No worries. Take your time.
Awesome. Appreciate it, man.
We're here, man.
Okay, back here. Okay, so with Scrub Daddy, they're great at doing a ton of awareness content. For those of you that aren't familiar, they're that little sponge company that is, I think, one of the best-selling products ever for Shark Tank. But awareness content is they make a ton of jokes about Scrub Daddy, about their sponges and all that kind of stuff. They then do interest content in which they start showing people from famous like cleaners or clean influencers on how this product is really superior and the features it has. The desire side is they do a ton of different variations. So if you're someone who's kind of goth and you like dark aesthetics, they've created a black version of Scrub Daddy. If you're into the whole idea of having small little things, they've created small versions of them. This idea of tailoring to you. And the action side is they do all these things where like, hey, if the first 100 people that see this post and go to our website and buy, we have this amazing sale going on right now. So they create that incentive for action. Another example that I'm going to give of this real quick as we go in is, say if I wanted to buy running shoes. I'll start off by becoming aware of all the brands that exist out there. From there, I'll become interested in specific types of shoes. From there, I'll start desiring a specific shoe. At that point, Nike's sending me ads with testimonials and all these things about how these shoes are going to turn me into the next like Jordan or anything, right? And then finally, the action is them trying to target me with ads saying, hey, we have this sale going on those shoes that you were looking at. The idea here is in awareness, you're telling me what you stand for. Right? You're trying to grab my attention. In interest, you're actually telling me about the features and the benefits. In desires, you're telling me about how people who are like me have loved this and how this pertains to me. And in action, you're actually incentivizing for me to go drop whatever I'm doing right now and take the action. Again, there's another video about this as well that goes into a bunch of different examples. You can check it out on the YouTube channel. Last thing that we're going to cover right now is going over, well, how do we combine those two concepts to turn people from strangers into those advocates? When people first meet you, they're going to be a little confused about you and they're going to be strangers. They're going to have a ton of questions. At that point, just give them basic information about yourself and give them an incentive to get involved. Say if that's something like, hey, we have this sale going on. When we had a clothing store when we were younger, we used to have a rack of clothes that were the lowest price in the entire store, just standing right outside. And the idea was that that low price would attract you to at least step inside. Again, giving you information and an incentive to take an action. At second point is they start buying something from you. So the first time they bought something, this turns into a customer. Fortunately, this is where a lot of people or a lot of businesses will stop focusing on that individual and start working on new people. At this point, what you want to do is introduce points of contact and an investment point. So for example, say, hey, what's your email address? Let's stay in contact after that. An investment point is, when you go to the barbershops and they give you those 10th cut and you'll get like the 5th, your 10th one will be free or something. That idea is getting you invested, be like, oh, I already went for 2 cuts. I should just go back there. At that point, they start coming back over and over again, right? They become a regular customer. Your goal at that point is to start sharing your business values now. You're moving away from the product that you're selling and instead telling them, hey, you've been buying from us for a while. Here's what we believe in, right? For example, Ben & Jerry's is really, or was into a lot of social justice causes. So they would host events for their supporters to come out and get involved in, like, say, a community cleanup. That turns people into supporters. And then the last thing to do to really turn them into what we want, which is advocates, is reward their support by giving them special things, right? So for example, giving them special accesses like, oh, you are an official supporter, here's a discount code you can give out. But also by allowing them to see under the hood. Say, hey, that effort that we're doing, this is why it's so important, is because we want to drive XYZ metric for the business. Is there any way that you can help us? You're no longer treating them like a customer who's buying something, but rather as someone who could potentially become a part of your team. And lastly, once they become advocates, always reward them and make sure that they are encouraged to continue working with your brand. So this is when you see a lot of like people who are really deep in with a bunch of businesses, and they'll say, hey, like we're going to not only give you a discount code, but we're also going to send you a bunch of free merch to advertise and stuff. But also we have these limited events that are, or these exclusive events we're going to invite you to. And the idea is always focus on a common metric that you want them to drive. Right. So for example, if you're a restaurant, you might say, hey, I want you to help me bring in, say, like one big 20-person party every month. Is that something you can help me do? Because it makes the expectation on their side very clear for them. Again, this is also an entire video that you can go through as well. So as we're closing out, and I don't think I've ever finished on time, so this is really a big moment for me right now. The four things I'm going to go over. One, your audience will always fixate on your anchor. I really, really despise when people come into a conversation and say, oh yeah, we're the lowest cost thing in the market. And it's like, if the first thing that comes out of your mouth is that you're low cost, that is all I'm caring about the entire conversation. There was a study done where they brought in two groups of people and they had them load up a mattress website. Half of the group, when that loading page was loading, it was green and had money signs and everything. And the other half had blue and clouds. This is called anchoring or fixating. And on the group that actually saw the money symbols, they fixated their entire time in the shopping experience on questions like price and quality, on price, sorry. But the ones that saw the clouds focused on questions like, hey, how soft is this mattress? Whatever you bring up is what your audience is going to fixate on. So learn to be able to fixate on what you really want your value to be. I was working with someone who does custom Air Force One decorations. And she came into the call and said, oh, I paint Air Force Ones. I was like, okay, cool. So does my cousin who bought a $50 set off of Amazon. I was like, what you actually do that you others can't do is that you help me express who I am. If I'm putting a specific design on my shoes, it's because I'm showing the world this is who I am in a space where I may struggle to communicate. I want you to tell people that instead of painting Air Forces, what you do is you help them tell their story in unique avenues or in unique methods. That change allowed her to start charging way more and start working with actual influencers and actors, as opposed to what she had in the past, which was working with local people or people who would essentially haggle over price and quantity and time and all that. The second thing, it's not about quantity versus quality, but rather the sake of quantity for the sake of getting to. So rather quantity for the sake of quality. My first TikTok videos that I started putting out there, horrible, atrocious. But the fact that I committed to putting one out every single day is that for every video, I got a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better. And I'm still growing and I'm still on my journey. But I give the same advice to all my sort of the mentees and all, is just get started. Run one Facebook ad, one Google ad, put out one newspaper thing. Just get started somewhere so you can start building up that skill set. Third, remember to have fun, right? This is supposed to be an enjoyable journey. You don't have to be everywhere at once. I, for one, hate the concept of email marketing. So I don't have an email marketing thing really set up that well. I'm collecting emails and I'm constantly reaching out every now and then with some questions and stuff, but it's not something that I necessarily enjoy. So I'm not forcing myself to do it. I don't really, or at least in the past, didn't really enjoy working on like my Instagram profile. And so I fixated on my TikTok one, grew that. And now that I'm in a space where I can enjoy building out an Instagram profile, I'm working on doing that. Focus on making sure you're having fun because that's what's sustainable for the long period. Lastly, if there's anything I can do to help, make sure to reach out. I'm always happy to, and I'll give you exactly how to reach out in a moment. There is one exciting thing coming up. So I'm working on a couple free ebooks to send out there. There's one coming up about innovation demystified, where we go over a bunch of sources of innovation using real life examples. And it's pretty similar to the tone you've seen in this talk. If you're interested, make sure to fill out that feedback form in the QR code. Anyone who's on the email list by then will get a free early copy of that when it comes out. And this QR code is also going to be on the next page, which has my contact information. If there's ever anything I can do to help out, please do reach out. And I appreciate you having me here. Thank you so much.
Awesome, man. So good. How does it feel, man?
Honestly, this is the first time I finished on time. And I can't tell, honestly, you know what I think it is because normally I like having a lot of audience interaction.
Right.
I'm realizing because I couldn't stop and start talking to people or going on tangents, I was able to actually get through the stuff, right?
Got it.
But no, this
That's
was
great.
fun. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me out for sure.
Absolutely, man. So let's jump into it because we already have the questions
Yeah.
queued up. So the first question I have for you is, in the work that you've done and the people that you help, what stage do you normally, when you showed the chart about going from a prospect to an advocate, what stage have you seen people commonly kind of get stuck at?
Yeah. It's the customer, it's either customer to regular customer or
Okay.
a regular customer to supporter, right? So what I found is people who are relatively early on in their experience or early on in their journey will tend to be like, okay, where are the new faces? Can I get a new person to walk in, right? Can I get another purchase? Can I get someone to come in? And it's because we often tend to operate at this scale mentality, right? Like I want 100 people coming in. But often what can be really powerful, for example, I was working with an entrepreneur and he was trying to set up an online business centered around South Asian jokes and content and sort of things that the community understand. What ended up working really well for him early on was that I told him, don't focus on getting 1,000 customers, focus on just getting 10 customers that keep coming back. Because what he was ended up able to do, what he was able to do at the end was those 10 customers that he got not only validated his idea, but because they kept coming back and he had to focus on turning them into these advocates and he only focused on those 10 people, they became his council of advisors. So now anytime that he has any sort of question, like, hey, should I put out this design or should I focus on this? Or this is a change I'm thinking about making, they became these advisors that are just invaluable to him. So for people who are early on in their journey, the focus should be move, don't focus on just getting a sale and a customer, focus on moving them up, look past going for someone new. If someone's bought from you once, that person's way more important than the new person that may try to walk in through the door. And then for those that are a little more experienced, it's often the regular customer point. Once you start getting a customer coming back over and over again, I think businesses tend to get very comfortable with that and say, okay, cool. Well, I've got this customer, repeat customers coming in. Usually an easy way to check this is using something like Google Analytics and all to be able to say, again, not sponsored in any way. This is my personal opinion. Can't be held liable for anything you do with this, right? But use analytics to see, oh, there's repeat customers coming in. But the question becomes, are they coming back because they care about you and the brand? Am I coming to your coffee shop 7 times because I like your coffee shop? Or is it that I hate your coffee shop, but you're the only one on the way to work, and so I'm forced to come in because I just want a cup of coffee? So really trying to answer that question and build these advocates. Does that help? Those are the 2 common places I've seen people get stuck.
No, that's great. And the reason I wanted to ask that question, because right now, because of the presence of social media, being liked and being followed heavily is valuable. It's deemed valuable. But when we think about business, and this is something that, I converse with a lot of my friends who are in businesses, are we making content just to make content to get likes? Or are we actually using the content to measure the call to actions, right? So are you going from liking my photos to actually purchasing a ticket to my concert, right? Is it translating well? And I think it's such an important thing to have this conversation, especially when we have student staff, where sometimes we get so caught up in how many followers we have, how many likes we have, and we forget why we're making the content in the first place.
Absolutely. I'll to add one thing is I'll say establish a KPI, right? A key performance indicator. What really matters, right? So I think a common mistake people will make is they'll treat followers as that key performance indicator. It's like, oh, I have 50,000 on Instagram, I have 100,000 on TikTok, I have 2,000 on YouTube, right? And they'll try to equate each to each, right? But that's not an accurate way to look at it, because 2,000 on Instagram means completely different than 2,000 on TikTok, means completely different on 2,000 on YouTube. But also at the end of the day, if you're a business, your core performance indicator should be the sales, right? And so I was working with someone who said, hey, I want to figure out if I should spend my time on TikTok or Instagram. She had more followers on TikTok, but I told her, okay, well, actually go into your analytics, take a look, and let's see who was actually buying. Turns out, even though she had a smaller audience on Instagram, almost 90% of people who came from Instagram were ready to make a purchase much bigger than the ones that the TikTok users were making. And so it gave her a clear indicator of where she needed to focus her energies instead of wasting her time in random places. So definitely focus on that end variable. What really matters in your business for you?
That's so good. That's so good. And I know it's a very important thing, because when we look at it, it's followers. I'm heavy on Instagram. That's my preferred social media platform. But some others are maybe TikTok. And I think a lot of people are chasing the next big thing And I don't know if people are really sitting down and having these conversations. I'm glad you shared the 4 Ps, and I'm glad you shared the marketing funnel, because these are principles that a lot of times we're being introduced to while we're in school, and we kind of like blow them off.
Yeah.
They're useful, tried and true models that really help you to develop your business.
I think the problem is often so I was surprised early on because I thought it was going to be a lot of business owners that were going to find my content, and I'd get a lot of business owners. But the more interesting thing, especially on social media, is comments from kids saying like, "Oh, like my professor taught me this, but it didn't make sense then," or like, "Hey, I'm in a marketing class now, and wow, this is actually making sense." And I think at the end of the day, when we're introduced to these things, we're introduced to them as abstract concepts, right? You see them in like a workshop, they tell you to fill out a worksheet, and then you move on. Which is why the goal here is to not only showcase these ideas, but then to show like, here's the actual step you are going to take, and here's how it relates to what an actual company in the real world is doing. So that once you start taking these abstract concepts, these aren't perfect. They're too simplistic to be perfect, right? But what they can do is help you get out of your head and just sit down for a moment and be able to process your thoughts and like look at the world of marketing around you and break them down into strategies as opposed to these, oh my God, how did they do that? Sure.
Absolutely. We had a question, or a couple questions just came in. First one is, what books would you recommend to have as a keepsake reference?
Damn it. I'm really bad at this, right? So all of those drawers down there are just packed with books. My family's banned me from getting any more books until I actually read them. So I'm a big sucker for buying, especially used books. I love having little notes in the margins and being like, oh shit, you thought this was cool. Oh, sorry, I don't know if I can. Yeah, I was like, oh, you thought this was cool, so did I, right? There are a couple books. Give me a second to think which ones I would recommend the most right off the bat. I would start off by saying, okay, so the first one, The Power of Habit, right? Yeah, The Power of Habit, right? Which breaks down how, like, the science behind habits and routines that we have. I think people tend to read this as a self-help book, but I often see it as a really powerful marketing book because it teaches you about triggers and how people react to triggers and what they do and how you can actually help build habits, right? For example, the moment I get a little uncomfortable at work or I'm a little tired, I have this habit of opening the Netflix app. Even if I'm not going to go and watch a Netflix, I'm like, wait, why am I doing this? Let me leave. That's a habit that Netflix, or what's the habit that TikTok has trained in me to be able to do. The second one from there, I would check out, you know what, let me come back to this. Can I send an email?
Absolutely, yeah.
2 or 3 books for sure. I can't remember them off the top of my head. But I'll send you an email, Gary, if you could send it back to whoever asked that question. Happy to share that.
Absolutely. I put the power to have it in the chat, so you get it. The next question is, what was the biggest obstacle you faced creating your brand, and how did you overcome it? And they also said, amazing job.
Thank you so much. The biggest struggle, the biggest obstacle has been myself, right? And overthinking it. So the idea to do Entry Key early on, this idea started in my sophomore year of college. I graduated class of 2020. So it's been like almost 3 years since graduating. Yeah, close to 3 years of graduating. And then 4 or 3 years before, 6 years ago was when I first started having this idea. And for the first 2 years, I did nothing but waste money and not produce a single good video that I could use. Because I was so fixated on, okay, well, I've got to build out a team. I've got to get the best equipment. I've got to do this. I've got to do that. Had I just sat down, what I do now, which is take my phone out and just film a quick video and put it up. Worst case scenario, no one would have seen it, right? No harm. Best case scenario, hundreds, thousands of people would have seen it. Still good. Even if it's a bad video, it's still good, right? I wish I'd learned that principle because it was that quantity. It was always that focus on quality, right? That's what I wanted my differentiator to be. I'm going to be the guy that has those really high quality videos on YouTube. And then I realized that in order to get there, I needed to start making videos. I needed quantity. So just getting started, I think, was the biggest sort of obstacle there of getting out of my head and just starting to begin with. And then the second thing I'll also add in is being able to actually measure things. So for a long time, there's a lot of just putting things out there and just doing things, but not actually tracking what was working and what wasn't. I would definitely start looking at that for sure. Yeah,
that's awesome. And which ties back into the KPIs, right? I think a lot of times we are, especially in the early days as business owners, we spend so much time being in the business, working in it, that we're not working on it.
Yeah.
Right. And I think we're all guilty of that as so much. We're so busy trying to deliver the service of whatever we say we serve, whether good or service, and we forget to actually take a step back and be objective about,
Exactly.
what we're actually doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You said it absolutely perfect.
And I noticed a lot of the examples you gave were actual products, right? So we have the M&Ms, the Heinz, the Starbucks, and Kirkland. How do these models and some of the things that you shared relate to services? Because services are a little different. You don't have a tangible item. How would you kind of address this from a service perspective if someone has a service as a business?
Yeah. So I actually think that it's easier for service businesses to use these models and actually build off of them, because it's easy when you have the common pitfall that people fall in when they have their products is, I think you said it best, working in the business as opposed to working on the business, right? Is they'll fixate on that product. They'll try to make their product the best that they can make their product, and forget that oftentimes it's not the best product that wins in the market. It's the one that's able to actually express itself to the rest of the world, right? So I think, for example, I was given an example on social media the other day with these luxury brands, right? So if you look at someone like, what are those purses that are really famous right now? It's a long waiting list. Birkins, right? Yeah. So Birkin bag, right? Handmade, amazing quality, right? And a big waiting list and a recognizable design. There are a ton of companies out there that can say the same thing about their purses. What makes Birkin different is they didn't just focus on the product, but they focused on turning Birkin, that logo that the Hermes has on it, into a symbol that is understood by others. If I were to walk into a random cafe wearing a bag, or like having a bag from any one of those other companies, people might be like, oh, I have no idea what you're trying to tell me who you are. I don't recognize that brand. So I can't tell if you're rich. I can't tell you if you're poor, if you're exclusive, if you're blah, blah. But if we walk in with a Hermes bag, it tells people something. Oh, Hermes has told me that this symbol means exclusivity, high price, blah, blah, blah. Therefore, you must be someone who has access to exclusivity, blah, 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 blah. And so because the Hermes took the time to build out that symbol and let people know what that symbol symbolizes, they're able to charge a premium. You're not usually paying for the quality or the product itself. You're paying for all the branding money that they spent on turning that into a symbol. For service businesses, it's easier to do that because oftentimes what you're doing is your brand. Everyone can clean, right? So my family, we have a restaurant supply business here in the US, and we are a service business for most of it. I tell my dad, you don't sell a cup, you sell the ease, right? Anyone can go and buy a cup or deliver a cup to these restaurants. What you sell is that confidence that they don't have to pick up the phone and remind you, oh man, we ran out of cups, is that you already know that. Or that you know what times to go in so that they're like least busy so that you can go in, put the stuff in, answer their questions. In service businesses, it's easier to follow these models because everything you do is building your brand as opposed to you don't have a product that you accidentally fixate on. Does that make sense? Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And as you talk about that, it's being able, everything comes back to communication, right? And I know in undergrad, we take communication class, and like you mentioned earlier, a lot of things are abstract, like a lot of stuff you just want to get through. But you really start to see how important these skill sets are, whether you decide to work for someone or to open your own business. These skills are so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's not just knowing the skills, but understanding that it's a mindset shift. It's forcing yourself to, when you see something interesting, right? So for example, the Taco Bell example, right? When I saw that, right, if there was an approach where I could have been, oh, that's funny that they're selling suitcases. But the question became, why is Taco Bell selling the suitcases? And because I've taken the time to learn ADA marketing funnel and all these simplistic models that I originally, when I first learned them, thought they were useless and just these abstract concepts, I'm like, oh, wait, at what point is this an awareness thing? Is this an interest thing? Or which one of the P's? Or why am I getting this ad as opposed to someone else? Am I further along that advocacy level, right? Once you start thinking and viewing things that way, you're able to break down these strategies. People are always like, oh, I don't know how you do it. Trust me, if you break down what I'm doing into these small steps, what I'm doing is very easy, right? It's just, I have a framework and I follow the framework and I break things down into manageable steps. And once you know these frameworks, you can do the same exact thing.
Awesome. Last question before we wrap. Your upbringing and your family being business owners is a big part of just your exposure. Yeah. What would be your suggestion for anyone who wants to get some of this real life exposure to branding and marketing, but they may not have a family member or friend how can they cultivate a community of people that can kind of help them to be able to think through some of these concepts that you spoke about today?
Yeah. I am Medium, if you're watching this, sponsor me. There is a website called medium.com, right? And what they've done is effectively, normally it's normal for bloggers to have their own websites, right? But it's difficult to build like this big brand awareness unless you're someone really, really famous, right? And so what Medium's done is created a common space where bloggers will join on and to be able to actually put their content there. Now, you as a reader can go on, and I think it costs like $50 every 6 months or so. It is the best purchase I've ever made in my life, because you get to read what all of these people, all of these thought leaders, and all these like average normal people finally have an outlet to be able to share their thoughts on ideas. So the first thing is just expose yourself. My little sister recently just got into the big banking world, right? And her big question was like, what should I do? And I was like, for now, just dive in, drown for a little while, right? Read as many articles, read the Morning Brew, read as many things. Because at first these words aren't going to make sense, but that doesn't matter because the first thing is just getting familiar to all the words you're using. If this is the first time you heard ADA marketing funnel, right? This will change what you're doing next. Start reading more. What is the ADA marketing funnel? What is awareness, right? The more you expose yourself to these words and start using them, the easier it becomes for you to then go on and have intelligent conversations. I talk to some of the world's biggest marketers on a daily basis, and I used to be super, super scared. I was like, oh my God, it kind of feels like I'm way out of my depth. And then I realized most people, all it takes is knowing 8 or 9 really unique, smart sounding things. And you'll be surprised how much of your conversation, how much it opens up the world, unless you're going into becoming a neurosurgeon, right? For me, the rest of the world has always been, it's knowing 5 or 6 key pieces of information, and the rest, you'll usually get a chance to be able to interact with others and pick up over time. So big advice is just go and learn the words to begin with, and then start see the conversations people are having. The more you put yourself in a space, the more opportunities you open up for yourself. I was fortunate where my parents did that for me, right? But nonetheless, what makes it special wasn't that I was at the stores physically. What made it special was that I was just at the stores physically, right? That I was at a place and I showed up. Sorry. It wasn't that I grew up in a small business family. It's that I was physically at a store, showed up, and was exposed to these things. Just show up at events, read things, expose yourself to the world, and you'll realize that there's a lot of opportunities to connect and do stuff. Yeah.
That's a great way to end, man.
Yeah.
That's a great way to end. I want to thank Chirag for spending time with us today and presenting. We appreciate you being with us. Thank you all for participating today. We are looking forward to seeing you guys in March. Our next Lunch and Learn is going to be March 22nd at 12:30 p.m. here on Zoom. And it's entitled Bootstrapping Your Business, Strategies and Tips for Launching a Business with Limited Funds. And also be on the lookout for an email with today's recording. Have a good day.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone.